So Sean, first of all, it's really nice to see you. I haven't seen you since you left South Africa. How's Singapore?
Yeah, it's very good. Thanks, Gareth. As you said, we're in week 6 of our lockdown here. We've got another 2.5 to go, 3 to go. So it's been quite long. We've had a soft lockdown for about 3-4 weeks, hard lockdown then for 6, and as I said, another just under 3 to go. But it's good.
And how has Singapore dealt with this? Because in the beginning, I remember the Prime Minister was putting out videos telling people what, COVID-19 was all about and what kinds of measures they should take. And for a while, I think people really thought Singapore was the leading light in terms of how to deal with and address this obvious crisis.
Yeah, they were. I think the PM came out really well. Understood the need for communication, understood the need for fast action. I guess Singapore, like China, Hong Kong, had the experience of SARS in 2003-4 to draw on as well. So very fast to act, no such thing as over-prepared, and really went for it. So it was really held up as the poster child how to deal with it. Exceptional things like contact tracing. So they set up teams to identify people, when there was a case found, whoever was in proximity, and dealt with those people and set themselves like 2-hour targets to identify those people that were at risk. So they're really, really good. Then what happened to Singapore was it got caught by surprise on imported infections. So Singapore around mid to late March closed its borders effectively to all but returning Singaporeans. But those just returning Singaporeans ended up obviously bringing some infections back into the country. So we went from that stage, I think around about, if memory serves me correctly, about 250, 300 cases to, I think today we're on about 23,000. And that then led to a harder lockdown. But it's pretty much, I would say, getting under control. Testing has been really extensive. So there's... They've been really good at the contact tracing, at testing, and they've been very good at managing the people that have been tested positive, isolating them, setting up areas to accommodate them, and so forth. And remarkably, throughout all there's been 23,000 cases. The deaths, thankfully, have been really low. I think as of today, it's sitting at only 21. That's obviously heartbreaking if you're a loved one of those 21, but relative to other countries, they've been able to manage quite well. But it's a good lesson in letting the guard down.
More people than that have probably been eaten by crocodiles in Mozambique this week. So that's probably a very good number for the government of Singapore to be bragging about. And obviously the human cost of this we'll only know in the final accounting, and that may be months away. But every government is doing what they think is best for their people. Now, I'm curious about how this might have affected the advertising business, and particularly because TBWA is this monster that isn't just an advertising industry giant anymore. It's also a master of culture, a master of communications, a master of marketing in various ways, shapes, and forms. So, how has the coronavirus pandemic affected advertising, marketing?
Yeah, like every industry, it's changed significantly. I mean, we exist and we're an extension of our clients' business. And those industries are varied, in this part of the world, from financial services to automotive to technology and so forth. I think the one thing I would say, Gareth, is a learning from Asia is that the short answer is we don't know yet. I think there's probably, and you see it in a lot of the commentary, having a very fixed mindset and a fixed point of view of the world in a very fluid environment is probably not a great combination. And I think, it seems like everyone's turned into a futurist. And, there's a lot of heavy opinion there from a very specific point of view. I mean, there's those two psychology terms, the black and white syndrome or splitting, which is, we seem to galvanize towards the extremes, and then false consensus where we surround ourselves with people that agree with us. So we believe in entrenched positions and that they're really right. But I think what we're seeing in Asia is that this is absolutely non-linear. We have absolutely no frame of reference to draw on here to try and come up with these hard and fast predictions for the future. And I think, the world seems to vacillate between people wanting it to go back to normal and thinking, it will go back to how it was 6 months ago. And the other half of the world seems to think we're going to have some kind of, massively changed dystopian future. But I think history has shown us that some things will fundamentally change and not go back. Some things will go back to a close approximation of what they are. And really, I think from a business point of view right now, it's to try and keep an eye and try and identify which of those changes are systemic and long-term, and which are temporary and won't be sustained. And that really, from an advertising point of view, working with our clients is what we're working through. So industries don't know, and we're trying new things. We're trying to identify what will likely be around for a very long time and will change how the advertising world facilitates the clients in going to market. I think there's a couple of things that are clearly probably here to stay. One is we've seen a rapid increase in the digital transformation. So if we look around the region here, not just Asia, obviously it's happened everywhere, but we have the benefit of an extra month or so here. But obviously e-commerce, and not just the growth of e-commerce, but also how e-commerce has changed, how there's different routes to market, the role of influencer marketing, the role of things like this weird amalgamation of soap operas and e-commerce channels that are emerging. We're seeing brands behaving in a different way. So you had Louis Vuitton, for example, have its first ever live stream event in China. And you wouldn't have thought a luxury brand would sell that way previously. So I think we have deep systemic issues in terms of digital transformation change that are very exciting. And I think we have some that are probably less likely and more temporary as well. So we see massive consumption, for example, in screen time. When people were locked down in China, went from average, I think, about 70 minutes a day to over 7.5 hours. And obviously content had to be created to fill that. Now, that's not sustainable. We don't have the attention to support that going forward. But the digital routes to market will change quite significantly. The relationship with brands and how brands have behaved at this point in time, I think will define what consumers will tolerate them from going forward as well. So I think right now there's macro level high trends that we can see go, yeah, they're probably here to stay. And the rest, quite frankly, we're working through, and we'll work with them as they evolve over the next weeks and months.
Have people been spending more or less money? Are there some that are spending more and some that are spending less? And have we yet been able to identify, since we're almost 3 months into this new world, where it's paid off and where it hasn't?
Yeah, there definitely is trends emerging, Gareth. Obviously, you can see share price, Amazon, Netflix are reflecting that. Then if you dig into e-commerce itself, actually it's quite interesting is if you look at the growth in e-commerce as a general category, if you look at the top 15 growing categories within it, they're all what could be perceived as like essentials. So foodstuffs, wellness stuff, vitamins, etc. And we're seeing a lot less spend on luxuries. So apparel has regressed significantly. Luggage was the biggest declining category, for example. So people are going back to basics. So that's very, very clear. But the interesting thing about what we're seeing here is that for every piece of data, there's almost like a counterpoint. So when people were going back to basics, you're seeing and shopping online, as soon as China, for example, opens up, you're seeing this phenomenon of revenge shopping happening. So people are going back, and the Hermes store, for example, had $3 million in sales in one day. It's highest ever. So yes, there's definitely patterns that are emerging. And as I said, what we're trying to see now is which are going to be sustained and which are temporary. I think it probably should be noted though, Gareth, as well, that the narrative of Asia's back to business as usual and China specifically has come out the other end. That's very much far from the truth, and I think this is very much a work in progress. So you have the Chinese government, for example, really trying to stimulate the economy. You have recovery coming back as China unlocks. but not at the pace that people had hoped. So we're in for a bit of a long run yet, I think.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so true and resonates with so many people that we don't know yet. And it's okay to admit that, but you've got to be ready to adapt to the change as it occurs. What kind of a change was there for you in terms of working in South Africa for such a long time and then suddenly finding yourself in Singapore, culturally and in terms of the whole social construction around what you do and don't do in Asia? Have you battled to come to terms with that, or are you safely and firmly in the seat now where you know exactly what to deal with in terms of people and the way they behave differently?
Yeah, good question, Gareth. And I think there's elements of familiarity and there's elements that aren't so familiar. I think the one thing that we know of South Africa is it's a massively diverse place. And it's actually a great training ground to deal with lots of diverse people across borders. I think what you have a lot of commonalities actually between, say, South Africa and or Africa in general and Asia. You have, if I take South Africa, you have Santon, and 5 or 6 Ks away, you have Alex. You have this massive, disparity of wealth, and you see the same pan out here, both across the region and also in Asian countries, where you have a small amount of very wealthy people living in a very developed environment. You have a smaller amount of middle class, and then you have a lot of poverty as well. So there's a lot of similarities in that sense. I would think sitting in Singapore is obviously quite different. It's a very small island state that's extraordinarily structured and developed, as you'll know if you've been here. I think the one thing that has probably been quite stark in terms of a difference and has become apparent during the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic is the relationship with leadership and the trust in institutions of government. So I think, China, Singapore, for example, Vietnam, they wouldn't probably have been able to have dealt with the pandemic the way they did if they didn't have either high levels of trust in those government entities or high levels of compliance to those government entities.
Right.
And there's very marked difference, I think, in the approach that we South Africans have there.
That's diplomatically put. Are you having fun though? I mean, is it a fun place to be? Does it feel as exciting as it looks when we see it on travel documentaries and in movies and things like that? Because Singapore seems to be this place of lights and glamour and glory and excitement and wealth and sophistication, and it's a real 21st century place.
Yeah, it is. I think the awe-inspiring thing of Singapore is their ability to plan with a long-term horizon in mind. So all of the things that you see, that infrastructural development, those buildings, the lights, the glitz, the glam, none of that is accidental. It's all as a result of long, proper, systemic term planning. I think the founder of the state was an absolute visionary, and has set in motion a series of events, perspectives that really take a long-term view of everything. And I think, generally speaking, zooming out into the broader Asia context, I think it's a hugely exciting place. You have obviously a rate of innovation coming out of places like China. So even if you look at how the e-commerce ecosystem is structured, is enacted with, the rate of development on sort of mobile first technology and so forth, it really is a place that feels alive and kicking and at the bleeding edge of innovation and development.
Well, I wish you luck. I know that you have an enormously big responsibility in terms of connecting people with brands and making messaging work and trying to enmesh yourself not only in the culture and the society of a totally different place, but if there's anyone who can do it, it's you. And I have no doubt that that TBWA Asia are going to find themselves right on that bleeding edge and making sure that they can deliver things that no one's done before. It's terrific. It's very exciting, and I'm pleased that we've got a connection there in you, Sean.
Thanks, Gareth, and all the best with the last couple of weeks. Hopefully, as you in your lockdown,
Thank
as you
you.
go
Yeah.
through your various
Well,
levels.
and unlike you at least have a deadline to work towards. We haven't been spoken to by our president in the last 2.5 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks. So we're waiting to hear from him when we'll move to the next level, or whether or not this is the way of the future. So we'll see how it goes.
I do think the structure that they put in place in terms of levels and being prepared to regress and progress, I think it's a very mature way of going about it. I think it's probably something we're just going to have to get used to as a global society for the foreseeable months, at least.
I hope not. I hope it's not something we get used to, because this is not the kind of new normal that facilitates ease of business or people's freedoms. So I'm hoping not, but let's see how it goes. I wouldn't want to be in government right now. Thank you, Sean.
All right, Gareth. Thank you. Take care.